heard that song in a long time. Thank you. Well, at this time, we're going to have our speaker who has come from Abilene Church. I'm not going to try the last name again, but Elder Tolley from the Abilene Church and his wife Grace have come, and he is going to be presenting us our message today. So please make sure you welcome him. Amen.
Thank you. Can you hear me? No? Yes. Hello. Hello. Happy Sabbath. Okay. Testing, 1, 2, testing. No. Doesn't seem to be. Okay. We.
Use the red one. Everybody move up. Use this one. Just put some. You watching it?
I think the mics are for the internet people, right? If we don't use mics, then they can't hear anything. Yeah. But had it not been for that, I would not need a mic. So happy Sabbath once again. Thank you, Mary Ellen, for the introduction. Thank you, Brother Aspen, for the song. Yeah, I've resorted to this one. Can you hear me now? No, it's still not working. Okay. All right. It might be. Hello? 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 No. It's okay.
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
I think we'll go ahead and get into our message. So about a week ago, I did not know that I would be here, and frankly, nobody knew that I would be speaking here today. But there's only one being who knew, and that was God himself. So during the week, I got a call from the pastor, and he said, we need you to go to San Angelo. And I remember the first time I came to San Angelo, I was assigned to come and speak here, but they gave me enough warning.
Check 1, 2.
So
Check.
I was
Check
able
1,
to
2.
cheat that time. I brought a pastor with me from Dallas. How many of you remember? You remember Yolanda? Yes. Now this time I didn't get enough warning, so I had to come and speak myself. But because there is no accident with God, so he always knows. And Mary Ellen said, God knows everything, and she was telling the children's story. So he was not taken by surprise. We are going to be speaking today from the book of Judges, Judges chapter 11. Before we get into that message, I just want to say that we are privileged to have a God-given library that we have access to 24/7 with no borrower's card, no commute to get to it, no late return fees, no rules on how not to use it. It is a miracle library that was put together by more than 40 writers who gave us 66 books over a span of 1,500 years. These writers mostly never knew each other. They wrote in 3 languages, Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, and wrote from 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. We call it the Bible. As we read the Bible, we must ask ourselves, what does this passage tell us about God? What does the Bible tell us about Jesus? And what does the Bible tell us about us, ourselves? So the Bible attempts to answer those questions. So anytime you read a passage, you've got to be able to answer those 3 questions. What is it saying about God? What is it saying about Jesus? What is it saying about mankind? Back in 1918, in a little village in South Africa, a little boy was born to a teenage mother. From the onset, this young boy was rejected because he was born of a very young woman who was married not in a Christian way, but in a traditional, African traditional way. So this boy did not fit the mold of the child of a king. So he was considered a failure right from the beginning. This boy later on went on to become somebody. Some of you here know about a man called Nelson Mandela. He became the first black president of South Africa. But look at the beginning, where he came from. The way that you begin does not determine the way that you end. The fate of a poor beginning lies in God's hands. He is the one who determines. If you look at the internet, look for stories of poor beginnings that ended in great endings. You will find many of them. Many of them are still alive today. So this story simply illustrates that your beginning does not determine your ending. So if you have a poor beginning, remember, God is still working with you. Our sermon title today is entitled, A Leader in Demand. A Leader in Demand. I want to introduce you to a very little known king of Israel by the name Jephthah, or Jephthah. How many of you know that name? We're a small group here. We should be free to interact, eh? This is the man that God chose at some point to lead Israel to victory. Let's go to the book of Judges, chapter 11, and I want to read as we get to find out more about this man. Judges 11, I want to read first verses 1 and 2. Do we have it on the screen often here? Do we do that, or do I have to? Sometimes, okay. All right. I will be reading from. I'll read from my Bible here, and I may ask some of you to turn to some texts for me, because I'm only using one hand. All right, and then you can read from there. So Judges chapter 11, starting from verse 1. And this story goes all the way to the end of the chapter. Remember, we've got questions that we must answer in our minds. from every passage, what does it teach us about ourselves? Any story that you find, any passage that you read. Verse 1 says, Now Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead begot Jephthah. Verse 2, Gilead's wife bore sons, and when his sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, You shall have no inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. So, verse 1 and 2 tell us the story. Jephthah was a mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot. Does this remind us of a story in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1, which says, Naaman was a valiant soldier, but he was a leper. The word but is used to connect two independent clauses or phrases. This is just a little revision of English lesson from school. When you hear the word but, B-U-T, you know that something is about to change. All right? So it is used to connect two independent clauses or phrases that could stand alone as separate sentences. It often indicates a contrast or a contradiction between the two clauses it connects. For example, I wanted to go to the beach, but it was raining. It can also suggest an exception or a limitation. For example, I like all vegetables, but Brussels sprouts. In some cases, but can be used to add a surprising twist or a contradiction to what was expected. For example, I was tired, but I stayed up all night and finished the book. So we are told that Jephthah was a mighty man of valor, but he was born to a prostitute. And here is the problem. His father Gilead had only one wife, but he had a relationship with a prostitute and fathered a son. Gilead acknowledged the boy and took him into his home. But his other sons didn't accept him. They called him, in verse 2, a son of a strange woman. So when Gilead died, and the inheritance was now to be shared or to be divided amongst the sons, the legitimate sons drove Jephthah away. They said, You don't belong here. You are a son of a strange woman. This is a fascinating story. Follow with me. So they rejected him. And after he was rejected, he couldn't stay there. So he left and went to another land, somewhere up there, north, Tob, yes. And when he got there, the Bible tells us that there were people there who accepted him. He's been rejected in his own family, and he goes to some strange place with strange people, and they accept him. Why was Jephthah not accepted? Because he was born of a strange woman, illegitimate. Was it his fault? No. Had he done something to cause his circumstances to be the way they were? They might have been jealous. So Jephthah did not choose his circumstances. He did not choose the circumstances of his own birth. And as I looked at this story, as I read it, I saw so many lessons coming at me. Sometimes we don't get along with people. We don't like people. We don't like our church mates. We don't like our family members. We don't like our fellow workers at work. We somehow are just repelled. We don't find any attraction to them. In fact, we are repelled. Why? Because we just don't like them. Why don't we like them? maybe because they speak in a certain way, maybe they are too loud, or maybe they don't smile enough, or maybe they don't dress well. What I'm saying is, sometimes the people that we reject in our own lives have had no part in who they are. If we can remember that everybody is made in the image of God, if we can ask God to help us to love everybody. All right. We move on with our story. So we find in verse 3 and 4, I'm going to go to 3 and 4. Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tob, and worthless men banded together with Jephthah and went out raiding with him. It came to pass after a time that the people of Ammon made war against Israel. So here is where the story begins to get interesting. They had driven him away, and he was roaming around with worthless men that had already been rejected by society themselves, men who had embraced him. He was their leader. He was their captain. Now they are threatened back home. The children of Israel are threatened with a war. And who do they think about? Who do they think of? Because remember that in verse 1, we are told that he was a man of valor. And now they are thinking, a war is coming. We need somebody with valor, somebody who can lead us through this war. And what happens? Exactly. Number 5. And so it was when the people of Ammon made war against Israel that the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said then they say to Jephthah, "Come and be our commander, that we might fight against the people of Ammon." Verse 6. Then, verse 7. So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and expel me from my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" Interesting. The man that they rejected is the man that they know they now need. They must eat humble pie and go to him and ask him if he can come and lead them in this war. And Jephthah responds, if we go to verses 10 and 11, before we read that, Jephthah responds and he says, "You sent me away, and now you want me to come and lead you? You've got to promise me one thing. If I come back, you've got to make me your leader." Verses 10 and 11, and the elders of Gilead say to Jephthah, in response to his request that they must make him a leader, says, and the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be a witness between us if we do not do according to your words." 11, then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord in Mizpah. So they agreed. They agreed to make him king. They say, "We will do as you say." Now, Jephthah, because he was a gifted man, a man of not only valor, but a man with wisdom, he begins to think about a plan. How is he going to handle this? Because he was a diplomat. Some commentators say that Jephthah was a diplomat. He was good at negotiating. He was a man of skill, not only in physical skill, but he was mentally blessed and mentally talented. he begins by saying, okay, what we must do maybe is to negotiate with the Ammonites who want to wage war against Israel. We must negotiate with them, and maybe we can avert the war so the war doesn't happen. If you look at verses 14 to 22, I'm going to skip some. I'll go to verses 14 to 22. What that passage there says, Jephthah is saying to the king of Ammon, I'm going to give you reasons, I'm going to give you a way out so that we can avoid this war. And he says there in that passage, 14 to 22, I'm not going to read it, but he says, when the children of Israel were traveling, they traveled through the wilderness, right? They had to go through certain lands. And because there was no other way, they had to ask for permission to travel through other people's lands. And when they got to this particular land that is in dispute, they asked for permission and they were not granted permission. But what could they do? They went around a few of them, but on this particular one, they had to travel through, so there was a war to keep them out. And because God was on their side, he came and helped them to fight that war, and they won. When they won that war, that land became their land. He says, we won this through conquest. So it is not your land. He's telling the king of Ammon, this is not your land because we won it through conquest. We did not steal the land. We won it through conquest. And the king of Ammon would not listen to that. And then he says, okay, here is another argument. When you go to verses 23 and 24, Jephthah was always careful to give credit to God. All the other nations always gave credit to their gods. And Jephthah was careful to give credit to God after each victory. Jephthah made sure the king of Ammon understood that the victory that they had won had come from God. The God of Israel, the true God, and his will had been fulfilling in allowing Israel to take the land. It was Jehovah who gave Israel the victory. Amen. So he says, the victory was given to us by God. Amen. So it was God's will that we take this land. You cannot drive us out of it. Third reason he gives, verses 25 to 26. He says, Israel has lived on this land for 300 years. Where have you been in all the 300 years? How can you, after 300 years, suddenly show up and you want to claim the land? Reason number 4, his final argument. He says, when you fight the children of Israel, you are fighting God himself. Because it is God's will that our nation is here, where it is. So through all these arguments that Jephthah was giving, the king of Ammon would not listen. So the war was on. Here is where the story gets interesting for us here today. I want to jump to verses 29 to 33. I will read 29 to 33. Says that, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he advanced toward the people of Ammon. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. You hear that? He is going to war, and this is such a mammoth task. And he believes that he must talk to God and make a special vow with God. God, I'm going to war, I'm going into battle with a tough enemy. Please deliver me. Deliver them into my hands. I want you, I need you to deliver. I cannot do this on my own. And if you do, here is a vow that I'm making, or a promise that I'm making to you. Whenever I come back after victory, I will give to you, sacrifice to you, whatever it is that comes out of my house first. Do you understand that vow? I just want us to spend a few minutes talking about that. Jephthah is saying, if the Lord gives him victory, he is ready, he is willing, he is able to offer up to the Lord anything that comes out of his house first as a sacrifice to the Lord. Now we can focus on the foolishness or the genius of the vow. We can all agree that whether we think it was a foolish vow or a good vow, we can all agree that Jephthah was fearful and in doubt as to what he could accomplish without God. So he reckons if he promises something to God, he can secure God's presence in the battle against the people of Ammon. So he was essentially, was he bribing God? I want you to talk to me. No. Right. Remember that vows were completely acceptable to God as long as people kept their vows. Biblically, if you go to Ecclesiastes 5, verse 5, it says, it is better not to make a vow than to vow and not keep it and not pay. It is better not to make a promise than to make a promise that you're not going to keep. So clearly Jephthah was a man of God and he intended to honor his vow to God. If you go to Numbers 30, verse 2, it says, when a man makes a vow to the Lord or makes an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So what if when Jephthah got home, there'd been a visitor, and the visitor is walking out? That's the first thing that came out of his house. What was he going to do? What if there had been an unclean animal that walked out of his house, like a dog, for example? What was Jephthah going to do? What if it had been one of his children? What if it had been one of his children? Somebody has read the story. Well, so let's find out what happened when he came back. I want to go to verse 34. Verse 34. When Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing. And she was his only child. Beside her, he had neither son nor daughter. So he gets home and his only, not just his only daughter, no, his only child. He didn't have sons, he didn't have other daughters, he only had one. And that one was the one who walked out to celebrate, to meet him. Verse 35. And it came to pass, when he saw her, that he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord and cannot go back on it. How many of us have ever made a vow with the Lord? How many have bargained with God? Think back and try to remember. What was that bargain that you made with God? I asked the question, how many have ever made a vow with God? All right. I see a few hands, one or two. Mine is up as well. When we are desperate for an answered prayer, my belief is that it is not only easy, but it is appropriate. We quickly go to making promises, making a deal with God. We say to God, God, if you answer this one prayer, I promise to stop drinking. God, if you can help me pass this exam, I will never be a lazy student again. God, if you heal me from this ailment, I promise to be faithful and keep my health. God, if you heal my son or my wife or my husband who has been in an accident, if you save his life, I'll give my life to you. Those are promises that we make when we need God. But whether the practice of making vows is what you would consider good or not, I want to call a vow selfless gratitude. Because remember, God clearly tells us throughout the Bible, he clearly demonstrates that he wants us to do something for him to do something. Have you ever heard about a quid pro quo? If you do this, I will do that. God operates in many ways like that. We have to be willing. We have to be willing to give up something for God to give us what we want. It's not new. It was an old practice. We see several examples in the Bible. Jacob made a vow when he was fleeing from his brother, that if God protected him, he would come back and give a tenth of everything he owned. We find this in Genesis 28. This is 20 to 22. Absalom made a vow which he broke later. His life was spared because of the vow, but God ended up taking his life because he broke the vow. You find that in 2 Samuel 15, 7 to 8. And Hannah made a vow when she was asking God for a child and promised to dedicate the child to God. David made vows when in trouble and saw his deliverance from God. Now, there's some bad vows and good ones. But what I want us to understand is that a vow is a commitment in this story on Jephthah's part. It can be a commitment on your part as well. So, vows demonstrate a solemn promise, demonstrating resolve and dedication to a specific goal. A fulfilled vow can lead to personal growth in your Christian experience. It shows a seriousness that is different from everyday practice. When Jephthah made his vow, he was saying to God, I hold back nothing from you. Everything I have, you gave it to me. If you must take it, so be it. I want to suggest to you, my brothers and sisters, that God is looking for men and women who are prepared to give up anything and everything for his cause. He is looking for people who will hold back nothing, people who are ready to say, take the world, but give me Jesus. when we reach a stage where we don't allow anything to stand between us and God, we have attained spiritual maturity. Nothing must stand between us and God. If we can understand that obedience to His will supersedes our financial integrity and our professional growth, when we understand that suffering our social and financial standing is worth it if it will allow us to remain obedient to our God. And to our young people, if we understand that friends can be let go of if they are coming in between you and your God. God is faithful. He is faithful to see you through. He will never leave you alone or forsake you. So, I want to take us to what I see here as a powerful lesson. Remember that Jephthah was rejected because he was born in unenviable circumstances. I want us to turn to a man who's a real leader in demand. The title is A Leader in Demand. I want to find some parallels that we see here. What I would consider something that struck me as I read this story. This is a common story that people don't preach from a lot of times. But it's a story that most of us know and we never really think. Remember, Jephthah was born in unenviable circumstances. Do you think of anyone that you can think of who was born in circumstances that were not enviable? Who can you think of in Scripture? Isaac. Somebody said, Jesus. Remember, Jesus came and was born in a manger. Jesus was born to a virgin woman. And by the way, I would have never chosen to be born in a manger. The people of the time even understood that that was a lowly birth. His own people who were supposed to accept him and embrace him, they rejected him. And who embraced Jesus? The sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, all those people that were regarded by society as bad people embraced Jesus. And what did he do in return? He embraced them. But I want to tell you today that Jesus is the man that we all need. The children of Israel realized that they needed Jephthah, and he came and delivered them. I'm here to remind all of us that Jesus is the only one who can deliver us. Even though we have rejected him, even though the world rejected him, even though we continue to reject him, we must get to a point where we accept him to be our Savior. We must ask him to come into our hearts. I just want to spend the next few minutes here just talking about Jesus. Jesus, as we read in our scripture reading, he is the cornerstone of our redemption. Jesus is the foundation of our Christian faith. He is the starting point and the source of our spirituality. God is showing that His ways are not our ways. Remember, we began by saying Mandela was born to a poor little girl, and he became the first president of South Africa. Then we talked about Jephthah, that he was rejected, but he became king. God's ways are not our ways. Jesus offers us salvation from sin, and he provides us the only path to eternal life. Jesus' sacrifice redeems humanity from bondage of sin, restores a relationship with God. And Jesus provides us the spiritual guidance, teaching us how to live according to God's will. Jesus is the leader in demand who teaches us to love our neighbors, to care for the marginalized, and to show compassion to all. I'm almost done. Just one more minute. Jesus demonstrates the value of forgiveness, mercy, and reconciliation. We can only find that in Jesus. Jesus transforms lives. He frees people from addiction. He frees people from sin and any destructive patterns that may be holding them. Jesus offers comfort and peace in times of sorrow, uncertainty, and in times of fear. Jesus provides a sense of purpose and meaning, helping us understand our identity and role in the world. I want to make an appeal to you today. Will you accept Jesus today and say, Jesus, I claim you as my leader, the one who will bring me to final victory against the enemy, the one who will bring an end to sin and suffering. I acknowledge your sacrifice on the cross for the forgiveness of my sins. I accept you in my life. May that be our prayer. And many people, when they read this story, they don't quite understand what happened to Jephthah's daughter. Right? We believe that clearly, actually, if you read it, you will find that Jephthah did not kill or sacrifice his daughter. If you read towards the end of the chapter, you will find that. So may God bless us as we think about the story of Jephthah and how we can see Jesus fulfilling that role in our own lives. May God bless us all. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Toli Mlondiwa. And now we're going to stand for the closing song, Jesus Saves. We have heard a joyful sound. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Spread the gladness all around. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Bear the news to every land. Climb the steep and cross the waves. Onward is our Lord's command. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Walked it on the rolling tide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Tells the sinners far and wide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Singing islands of the sea, echo back the ocean caves. Earth shall keep her jubilee. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing above the battle strife. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. By his death and endless life, Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing it softly through the